Before we start the podcast, Andy, I just want to say a quick word about our sponsor, Fidelity International. Now, Fidelity International is one of the biggest fund platforms in the world, as one of the biggest fund managers, and they manage billions of pounds for millions of customers worldwide. Now, Fidelity have a whole range of funds which you can choose from. They have best buy lists, and they even offer suggestions for where to invest this year's ISA. Some of those come from Tom Stevenson, who is their investment expert, and you will probably have seen in the national press. If you want to find out more about Fidelity, then go to fidelity.co.uk. I personally actually use Fidelity to run my own 50k portfolio on 80/20 Investor. Fidelity are also running a competition this ISA season where you can win back the amount that you invest in your ISA as hard cash. So go check out their website for more information.
Hello and welcome to episode 213 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Links. Damien, we're back, we're in the office, we're enjoying things. How are you doing?
I'm good. This is the third podcast I've recorded in as many days. So the good news was that midweek markets was back this week, so you've probably listened to that because I had a brief break with my flu and illness, and it was wonderful because I had so many nice messages on social media for people wishing me well. And you'll probably have seen that social media, we went a bit bonkers this week, didn't we, Andy? On social media, we're filming a lot of stuff, videos of me, pictures of us a lot, and showing you what's going on. So this is the third podcast because this morning I just recorded an interview with Pete Matthews. So there's plenty of you who also listen to Pete's podcast as well as ours. I did an interview talking about the Money MOT and other things, which will be out, I'm told, on the 27th of March. So keep an eye or ear out for that. So yeah. Lots of podcasts. How are you anyway, Andy?
I'm good, and I'm just glad to have my buddy back. He's you're looking well. It was a torrid couple of weeks, and Damien makes light of it. And obviously, you did notice that he wasn't around, but the poor guy was properly floored. Something that he hasn't had in quite a few years. Proper man, even man flu, was it? It was proper flu.
It was proper man flu. And last week when we did the podcast, I was only just getting over it. So that's been good. One thing I just mentioned is that Andy's been busy sorting out stuff to do with the podcast. So there'll be some of you wondering why you suddenly downloaded about a million episodes of our podcast, and Andy will explain what went on.
So yeah, we realised that we've only got 100 episodes in our feed on all of our platforms, whether it be iTunes or Android. And we know, obviously, we're on, episode 213. So there's 113 episodes out there in the ether that weren't reaching you guys. And we looked into the technical aspects, and it seems that our host, Libsyn, there was a little button on there that said basically that it was restricting us to 100 episodes. So we unchecked that button, and alas, everyone received the rest of our podcast. So it's great. It means that those people that have only sort of joined us in the last few weeks can actually go back and listen to us from day one.
Yeah, so the good news is that you can now find all the Money to the Masses podcasts in the iTunes feed on all the players, and some of you may have actually received some of them as a nice surprise.
Including our podcast from the early days when we were just kind of, feeling our way through. So I think you'll probably notice that it's a different feel.
Yeah, it's a different feel, but funnily enough, when we look back, loads of people listened to podcast episode 1 this week, so they probably would have thought, what's going on there? But these podcasts are meant to be evergreen because we try and talk about things that aren't necessarily contemporary to that week to make sure that you've got lots of content and go back and listen to them. So please do that. Anyway,
so
on with the show.
Yeah, that's the admin done. What have we got on this week's show?
Right, the first piece I want to do is about International Women's Day. It's a take-off from that, and I want to pick out 3 people in particular who I think you should follow. 3 women who deal with money. So it's relevant to our podcast and our audience, but I think we should champion them. Other than that, the next piece was going to be around something you should be doing with your pensions, not about how much you pay in, but a bit of admin. And it could actually mean if you don't do it, then your pension goes to somebody who you don't want it to. So I'll fill you in more on that. And the other thing we've been doing this week is content. We've been producing lots of content, updating lots of content, and we've reviewed so many of the robo-advisers out there, investment platforms, that I just want to go through and do a bit of a summary of sort of the main players in the robo-advice world and the investment platform world, what I like, what I don't like. And it's really aimed at people who are thinking about taking out a pension or ISA or topping up their pension and ISA this season before the end of April.
Great stuff. So we've recently had Women's Day, or International Women's Day, I think it was called, championing the women of today. And that's really what we want to do on the podcast, isn't it?
Yeah. When we had our meetup back in, I think it was November now, one of the great things about the meetup was the fact that the gender divide of the audience was clearly mixed. So there was many women there, and that was brilliant to see, because obviously we're guys and we talk about money relating to everybody, being inclusive, but I acknowledge the fact that sometimes it's great to hear a woman talk about money for women. So we're championing 3 of them today, and I actually know each of them. I've met them many times, become friends basically through doing Money to the Masses. So the first one I want to pick out is Lynn James. Now her website is called Mrs. Mummypenny. So you can see the play on words there. So mrsmummypenny.co.uk. Now Lynn, she's a great character, and she runs a blog where she talks about saving money. It's very family orientated. She talks about her family quite a bit, but she used to work in finance. She actually was an accountant, and then she left that world and ended up running the blog full time. And she's been doing it for a number of years, and she's been doing it very successfully. But what's interesting about Lynn is that she does a lot of her own personal story on there, and some of the stuff in her background is incredibly interesting, but it's very relevant to mums. And she also runs a podcast. Now, I think it's in conjunction with a local radio station. So go and have a look at her website, look at the stuff she writes about. One of the things she did write about for International Women's Day was about celebrating that and what women should do. And just 3 key points from the latest post she did on it was talking about how women should ask for more than they want, and it's really empowering them. And Lynn is brilliant. So she runs a business. She runs Mrs. Mummypenny as a business, and she's brilliant at negotiating and networking. And she's probably one of the best people I know at doing it. And she's become very well connected, and I think people can learn a hell of a lot. And I know there are people out there in the money blogging world or any type of blogging world who have learned a hell of a lot from Lynn about how to negotiate, how to drive their business forward. So have a look at that. The other thing she pointed out in that post is about not fearing investing, because unfortunately investing seems to be a very male-dominated and a very male-targeted world. She talks about that, and also she talks about putting yourself first. So go and have a look at that post. Hopefully it'll mean you start to explore a lot of the stuff that Lynn does, because it adds a lot of value, and it comes from a female perspective. Now moving on, Emma Drew. So Emma Drew, if you look up her website, emmadrew.info, Emma is, I think she is fantastic. She turned her blog into a business that turns over £100,000 a year. And she's a wonderful character. She's a lovely person. She openly talks about some of the issues that she has on social media about struggling with certain types of mental health, which it's refreshing. And she is brilliant if you want to try and work out how to make extra money. So she has lots of different groups. She used to have one about match betting. She has one about how you make money from blogging, or have a course about how to drive up affiliate earnings. Have a look at that course. It's worth having a look at, worth signing up for. I mean, I've heard a lot of good feedback. So she's in a slightly the same arena as Lynn, but she focuses a lot more on making money. And social media wise, she's absolutely nailed it. On social media, she has a huge following. She shares a lot about work. I mean, her husband now works for her. That's how much her business has grown. So it's a very inspiring story, because it's somebody who has built it up from nothing and built it into a business, but she's also, it fits around her lifestyle and personality. So have a look at Emma's. I mean, I absolutely love what she does. The third person I want to mention is, it's not a blogger, but it is a broadcaster and a journalist. Now, Georgie Frost, if you go and look for her on Twitter, it's at GEC Frost. And she does a lot of broadcasting. If you listen, she's got a fantastic radio voice, very intelligent woman, knows her stuff about money as well. She does stuff for BBC 5 Live, she does things for Talk Radio, and she even does This Is Money's podcast. So it's another podcast you can go and listen to, and I would listen to it because of her. She also does consumer pieces and broadcasting, but she's won the Broadcasting Journalist of the Year. When you have these award ceremonies for journalists, she has won that, because she is fantastic, and she's a brilliant person. And I will let the cat out the bag, really. I've voted for her, because I've been on some of these panels for voting for journalists who are the best and the broadcaster ones, and I voted for her ahead of the likes of Paul Lewis, who does Money Box, like BBC's Money Box. That's how good she is. And she's also a brilliant role model because she does a lot of stuff about women and women can and sort of the girl who can, all those hashtags. And she's into football and she supports Fulham for her sins. And I just love that about everything she does. It's very much about empowering women, and she's, like I say, a brilliant broadcaster and knows her stuff about money as well. So they're my three. If you're going to go and have a look at something that is women empowering women, because I accept that sometimes it's far better to hear from things from a woman, Lynn James at Mrs. Mummypenny, there's Emma Drew, and of course there's Georgie Frost.
Good stuff. So moving on to the next piece, we're going to talk about pensions, and you mentioned about pensions and people inheriting pensions, and something that people might not know about.
Yeah, this is something that it actually picked up in the Money MOT. So my new Money MOT, if you've not done it, go and look for Damien's Money MOT. You'll find it on the homepage of moneytothemasses.com. And all these sort of little nuances we try and pick up. So when you're going through and doing an action plan after you've got your results, we try and point to people of these things that they should be checking. Now, one of them is obviously whether you've got a will in place. So if you die, what will happen to your assets? And more importantly, what will happen to your children? But there is something else that people often overlook, and that's to do with your pension. Now, if you go to, you get a new job, and you start a job and you get a pension, your employer may pay in, you may pay in. One of the pieces of admin that will occur is you will be asked to fill in an expression of wish form or death nomination form. And what that form does is effectively tell the administrators of the scheme who is going to inherit your pension when you die, who you would like to. Now, you could have that even on a personal pension. You can stipulate who that is. What often happens is that people fill that form in and then they forget about it. And the point is that you need to go and check who you've put on that form, particularly if your circumstances have changed. Now, what they found is that 3 in 5 people, this came about for some research this week, which is what spurred me to pull it out as a piece on the podcast. 3 in 5 people have their pension will out of date. Now, I call it a pension will. That's a term they've used. But it's basically this nomination, this piece of paper that states who you would like to inherit your pension. That is out of date. And so that means that there were less than 20% who actually knew that their form was correct. If you've got divorced or married, it's particularly important because that starts to implicate who will inherit your assets by default. Now, the nomination form isn't legally binding, but what it does do, it tells the administrators of the pension who you would like to inherit. It actually speeds the process up. If you have the wrong person on that form, meaning your circumstances may have changed, if you have the person that you don't necessarily want now to inherit it, it could slow things down. Or it could ultimately mean that the wrong person inherits your money, because don't forget your pension is paid, and it can bypass parts of but it can go onto your dependents if you want to, outside of inheritance tax. So it's important to double check it. Now, how does that sort of fit with your will? An administrator would likely go and check your circumstances anyway, or they should do, and look at what's going on with your estate and what your wishes are generally to make sure it does still make sense. But as a piece of administration, a piece of admin, go and make sure you know who you've put on that form. So that may mean if it's a company scheme, go and ask your HR person. They may roll their eyes and get a bit fed up of you going and asking these questions, but you do need to check. And I'll give you an example. When I first started working, it was before obviously I'd ever met my wife, and it's before we were ever married. So I would by default at that young age have put my parents down as my next of kin and the people I would want to inherit my pension. Well, of course, I've moved around and changed jobs, and like people lose track of these pensions, they will lose track of who's going to still be nominated on those forms. So it's easy to realise, to get to the point where you've actually got something that's out of date. So if you do one thing, look at that, go and check it. If not, do the Money MOT, and I will remind you at the point where you need to do it. When you need to do it. So do the Money MOT and then sign up for the action plan. And I talk about these things throughout it.
Find out how fit your finances are for free with Damien's Money MOT. With no registration required and no need to access policies or paperwork, you'll receive your own personal grade, together with a breakdown of where you should focus your attention, all in the time that it takes to boil the kettle. Crucially, you'll get to see how you measure up compared to everyone else, and even get your own tailored plan on how to improve your score. Simply go to mot.moneytothemasses.com. So sit back, relax, take Damien's free money MOT. Go to mot.moneytothemasses.com to get started and reward yourself with that cup of tea afterwards. Okay, so we've been busy at it in the last couple of weeks, Damien. Money to the Masses Towers, updating and looking at all of the investment platforms out there, all of the robo-advisers, and there's been multiple changes we've realised in recent weeks. And we've become, we're already the experts, aren't we? But we've become super experts. We want to share that news with the listeners.
Yeah, and Andy... And it's been a bit of a baptism of fire, hasn't it, Andy, for you? Because Andy obviously is involved in writing the content now and looks at all these reviews that we do and have done and updates them. And so it's having to learn about investment platforms, because the one thing, if you want to take out a stocks and shares ISA or you want to take out a pension, the one thing that is very difficult to do is compare like for like, because they're all so different, and they also all have very different charging structures. So for your personal circumstances, how do you know which is the cheapest? Because one of the biggest things is it depends on how much money you put in, but it also depends on what you want to do. So do you want someone to run the money for you? Do you want to run it yourself? And so we have a summary of all of them. So if you go to moneytothemasses.com and you put in the cheapest stocks and shares ISA into the search bar, or you put the cheapest SIP into the search bar, you will find the post that we've updated with heat maps. So when we say heat maps, we mean those coloured charts where you can quickly look at and say, oh, green is cheapest. And we do it by portfolio size. So even if you have an ISA or a SIP, you can have a look to see how much money you could be saving by switching. And don't forget, you can switch. Just because it's not done regularly or not promoted, you can switch. Fewer and fewer platforms are charging exit fees. Now, Hargreaves Lansdown does, but Interactive Investor, for example, used to, and they've now ditched exit fees, so they no longer stop you moving your money elsewhere. That is something that's going to continue that direction of travel because of the FCA, and they want that to happen. But go and have a look at those. So in the first and foremost, go and look at those pieces and you will find who your cheapest will be, and based on what you want to do, if you want to have someone run the money for you or you want to do it yourself DIY.
We'll link to those as well on the podcast itself. So if you've got your podcast app in front of you, have a little look and there'll be links to those two main articles on there.
Yeah, so there you go, magic. The other thing is we review each of them. So from those articles, you can go and find a Hargreaves Lansdown review where we go through it, and it is warts and all. We do it on everything. You name it: Nutmeg, Money Farm, AJ Bell, Wealthify, Pension B, which is pensions, Best Invest, Fidelity. I could go on and on and on. We review them all, but in such granular detail that like nobody else does. And we test drive them and everything like that. So they've been updated, so go and have a look at them. But for the purpose of this podcast, we're going to run through the two main types. So the DIY, they're fully managed. So we're going to look at robo-advice, and we're going to look at the sort of the most popular platforms and just chuck out there the kind of the differences, the pros, the sort of cons, the things I like basically about what some of them and the things I don't like about some of them. And we're going to focus on just the key ones, the biggest players in the market, because ultimately they're the ones that most people are going to end up choosing between, because it's not just about marketing pounds. The biggest players in the market tend to be the biggest for a reason, i.e. they're generally the better. So let's start with the robo-advisors. Now we're going to go with Money Farm, Nutmeg and Wealth Simple. I'll touch on to Wealthify as well, but Money Farm, Nutmeg and Wealth Simple are pretty much the three biggest players in the robo-advice market. So what that is that you go onto their website, there'll be a questionnaire which you'll go through, and then you'll be recommended a portfolio, and that portfolio you can then invest your money in, and they'll run that portfolio. Now, there are some differences. They look very similar in some ways, these different propositions, but there are nuances. Now, let's take Money Farm to start with. Money Farm will provide you one of 6 portfolios. That's what they do. They have a pension as well, so all of these 3 we talk about have pensions. A lot of the other robos out there don't offer pensions yet. So if you want to have a pension and start saving into one, then you can't use the others, but you can use Money Farm, Nutmeg and Wealth Simple. Now Money Farm, the way they work, 6 portfolios, vary in risk, and you put your money, you do the questionnaire, you get recommended a portfolio, and it is a recommendation, so you are going to be recommended something, and it is financial advice, which they're liable for. Then at the end of every year, they're going to review that and tell you whether you need to move up or down. So there's a review going on, which is quite nice. Now, one of the things with Money Farm is that they changed their pricing. So go back 18 months, they came smashing into the UK from Italy, and they had the cheapest deal going in terms of charges. And what actually happened is, like all of these business models, they come in, they land grab by getting low charges, then they realise they're getting further funding and continue to grow, they're going to have to raise their charges slightly. So they started to morph into another version of Nutmeg in terms of cost. There's barely anything to choose between Nutmeg and Money Farm on charges. So it comes down to what do their propositions offer. Now, Money Farm actually offers something quite interesting in terms of an investment consultant. You can have a named investment consultant, but you can only have that if you go via a link that we've got on our site that what happened, we negotiated and we said, look, if you want to make a difference, you've got to give people investment consultants, named ones. I know you don't for your rest of your customers, but this is what people want. So they listened and they said, great, we'll do that then. Anyone from money to the masses can have one. And we often do that. We look at different propositions and say to people, look, this is going to be good. Why don't you offer something extra? It doesn't change our view on it. It doesn't say we'll be very honest and quite brutal about the product. And if you read the Money Farm review, you'll see that I am about certain things quite brutal. But it's one thing that sets them apart. You get an investment consultant and you get a portfolio review. And they do also offer a discount now on up to £15,000, which you can get if you go and read that review. And you can see if you decide you like it. Compared to Nutmeg. Now, Nutmeg have their standard 10 portfolios, okay? And they also offer a limited number of fixed allocation portfolios. The 10 managed ones are just like the equivalent 6 over at Money Farm, where they're managed and they're meant to change. But Nutmeg also offer a fixed one. It's kind of like their version of like a Vanguard fund, just a tracker. Now, what I quite liked over in Money Farm is I met their investment guy. I went in there and grilled him, and I was pretty hard on him, talking about, well, what happened, talk me through what happened in the sell-offs in the February last year, what changes did you make? And actually, their investment process is pretty sound, and I quite like it. Nutmegs, what is interesting, in the last year, I compared the performance. If you look at the reviews on our site, I compared the performance of Nutmeg versus Money Farm. And what tends to happen is Nutmeg tend to outperform at the high risk level. So when they're trying to shoot the lights out, they're good and they will outperform. They tend to outperform the other robo-advisors. But if you're looking at the middling risk profile, which is most people, they have tended to underperform, and they actually show those numbers on their website that against competitors, and you can see it in black and white even there. But when I looked at it compared to Money Farm and some of the others, they clearly did. So I'm not quite sure that they handled the back end of 2018 as well as they might have done. And I've seen odd criticism of people online about Nutmeg, but I think some of that is people not understanding that investing, the value of your investment can go down as well as up. Nutmeg have a pension. They are one of the biggest players in the market. So as a proposition, it's pretty good. It's well rounded. But in terms of performance down the lower end, I think you can get better elsewhere. Money Farm have done better in that regard. The one thing that I don't like about Money Farm and Nutmeg is that they have quite high minimums in terms of investing. So Money Farm used to have no minimum, and that was quite attractive because it allows people to try a service almost and then increase the amount they invest, and it also encourages new investors. But they raised that up, and it basically, broadly speaking, it's the same as Nutmegs. You have to have at least £500 and even more if you want to do a pension through them. Now, Wealthsimple, who came from Canada and the US, and they're really big over there, they've come and they've taken that mantle on. They don't have a minimum. But what's also been impressive, they've only been around about a year or so in the UK. They came in 2017. Their performance over 2018 has been pretty good. I was actually quite impressed by it compared to the other two. Now, it's that whole thing, one swallow doesn't make a summer. It's only 1 year's performance. We've got to see how they perform going into the future. But they tick a lot of boxes. They have junior ISAs. They have a pension. I mean, for example, Money Farm don't have a junior ISA. They have a range of portfolios. You can get an investment consultant, but only if you have a certain amount. Now, Wealthsimple are quite clever because what they've done is they've got tiered structure in their charges. The others have a tiered structure, but what they do, their tiered structure doesn't reduce on the amount over a certain sum of money. So normally what happens if you have over 100k, you have a slight reduction in your charges on any more that you put in. What Wealthsimple do is they actually just, once you hit a certain level, all your charges and all your money drop. And they also have a slightly different tiering in terms of structure of customer. So they have a black level and they have, it's like a club. So you actually, in one of their levels, if you put in a certain amount of money, you get unlocked certain, like airport lounge access. And so what they've worked out is that rich people want exclusivity, they want exclusive benefits, and none of the other robos have worked that out yet. And so I quite like it. So overall, Wealthsimple are an interesting proposition. They tick a lot of boxes. They might not have the track record of Money Farm and Nutmeg. Nutmeg has a much longer track record in investing, but they are interesting. I mean, Wealthify is another one out there. I mean, they are, again, generally, the one thing I'd mention about Wealthify, they have a very low minimum as well, just like Wealthsimple. That's a big tick in their box. But the one thing they seem to be quite cautious in their portfolios. If you look at our review, we talk about it, that their portfolios at the cautious end did badly compared to others out there like Money Farm, but their high-risk ones did quite well in 2018. And I think it's just generally speaking, they've got quite a cautious mandate of running money. And I called it out actually about a year ago, and they've since increased their exposure to equities more in line with the others for a medium risk profile, but they still seem to be fairly cautious. So go and have a look at the website, go and look at all the reviews. That was a quick sort of sweeping tour of some of the key robos. We look at others like eVesta, but I want to quickly move on to platforms, because we did platforms as well, didn't we, Andy?
We did indeed, yeah. So which ones are we going to focus on particularly?
Well, Hargreaves Lansdown are the market leader. Interactive Investor are now number 2. They used to be TD Direct, and basically they went around and bought up. Well, they white labelled a number of different propositions, so that meant that you didn't realise you were using Interactive Investor. They are now gone out there, rebranded, and they're the second biggest in the market. Then we've got Fidelity, and of course then I'm going to mention Vanguard. They might not be the biggest, but they are land grabbing in the UK. So the first thing I'll throw out there, Hargreaves, Interactive Investor, Fidelity, they offer all the wrappers, so pensions, ISAs, junior ISAs. Whereas Vanguard don't offer a pension as yet. They keep promising a pension is going to come. Now with Vanguard, you can only buy Vanguard funds, but I mean, boy, are they cheap. I mean, the platform fees, I think 0.15% on your money up to a maximum of £375 a year. That is ridiculously cheap. Compared to other platforms, if you had, say, $500,000, they might charge you £375, then you've got to add on the fund charges, about 0.22 or something like that. They charge you £375. Other platforms could be charging you a couple of grand. So that shows the difference. But the downside of Vanguard, you can only buy their funds, which, up to your viewpoint, if you're going to buy and hold and you want to buy life strategy funds or trackers, then that's a good thing. But what people don't realise is that it's actually cheaper to buy Vanguard funds through Interactive Investor. Go and look at our review of Interactive Investor and I explain how. And actually, go and look at our Vanguard Investor review, because I point it out in there in particular. Because Interactive Investor have a fixed fee proposition, which means they charge you £90 a year, it works out, regardless of how much money you have. So at very small amounts, £5 grand, £10 grand, they're expensive. But as soon as you start getting up to like £50,000, they start becoming cheaper. And in fact, if you have more than 50 grand in Vanguard funds, it is cheaper to have them on Interactive Investor than it is to have them directly with Vanguard through their platform. But you've also got all the other choice of funds that you could buy, the thousands of funds and shares. So that's one reason why you might pick Interactive Investor. Now, Hargreaves have a percentage fee that they charge, a platform fee of 0.45%. Overall, they're not the cheapest, but as a platform, as an experience, as a customer service proposition, they still tick all the boxes. They have great research on there, they have a great app, great customer service, and they still remain the most popular. If you look at a lot of the awards that are given out, Hargreaves Lansdown tend to do very well in them, particularly around the SIP that they have, their Hargreaves Lansdown Vantage SIP. If you want fund suggestions, they have them. Again, Interactive Investor do. So the more money you have, the more you would move towards Interactive Investor. The one issue with Interactive Investor, though, is that if you hold just boring old funds, I say boring, that's what most of us hold, rather than ETFs and shares, Interactive Investor charge for fund switches. And the one thing you need to watch out for if you look at places that charge is that sometimes they class a fund switch as 2 trades, a sell and a buy, and therefore you get charged twice. Hargreaves Lansdown, Fidelity and Vanguard don't charge for fund switches. Well, Vanguard don't offer anything other than their own funds, but Hargreaves Lansdown and Fidelity will charge you for trading in ETFs, but that's a standard. So if you want to buy funds, just funds, and trade a lot, then you would steer towards Hargreaves Lansdown and Fidelity. Now, on Fidelity, I just want to mention, they are generally speaking cheaper than Hargreaves on a lot of levels, particularly as you get more and more money in your portfolio. If you're going to open a Fidelity account, go via Cavendish. Now, Cavendish means that rather than pay 0.35% platform fee, like I said, Hargreaves was 0.45, you can actually get Fidelity at 0.25. then you just use the Fidelity website. It's just like a skin that goes over it. It lets you through a portal. You then a Fidelity customer. You can forget Cavendish and just log in via Fidelity. It's what I do. And that is incredibly cheap. And there's going to be very few ways of getting a platform any cheaper than that. So Fidelity, the downside is their website's a bit clunky. I say this again in the review. Go and have a look. It's definitely improved, and they've widened their investment options, the number of things you could buy, because you couldn't buy shares before or ETFs, but you can now. So in terms of the 1, 2, 3 on platforms, we're looking at the biggest. Hargreaves Lansdown wins out on the general proposition and ease of use and customer service. They're not necessarily the cheapest, but they're not the most expensive. Interactive Investor, if you hold loads of money and don't want to do lots of switching, they're by far the cheapest. And a kind of middle ground is Fidelity, but then Vanguard is exciting if you want to just buy and hold investment trackers. But the bigger your pot gets, if you get over 50 grand, then things like Interactive Investor can be cheaper. Of course, there are other platforms. We talk about Charles Stanley, AJ Bell. AJ Bell is incredibly popular with a lot of people out there. Their website is slick. It's a good experience. Their charges are good as well. So that's another one to look at the review. So hopefully, Andy, I've given people a bit of a whistle-stop tour that they've given them already whittled down the potential platforms and robo-advisors they might want to look at if they want to invest in an ISA or pension this tax year.
Yeah, and if you're someone who listens to the podcast and just tunes in for the general sort of gist of finance and everything else, and you haven't yet sort of stepped over and thought about investing, then do take a look at those articles. I'm very much a novice investor, and just from the last few weeks I've been learning a hell of a lot. My experience comes in sort of in the protection industry and that side of the finance. And I tell you what it's done for me, Damien. I've personally started investing in an ISA properly now through my knowledge and understanding of what I've read through the website. So I'm hoping we can do that for listeners too.
Yeah, and that'd be great if we can just get people doing small and often. Somebody on Instagram wrote the other day they started up a lifetime ISA and it was only a small amount. But the point is, it doesn't matter how much, it's that first step. It's that starting a good habit. So do explore these things. And if you have any questions, contact us on Instagram. We're doing loads on Instagram and Twitter, and it's been brilliant. And you guys sharing all this and sharing what we do, the Money MOT, is really starting to drive things forward.
And if you do decide any of these things are for you, like I say, go onto the website. There's all sorts of things available through Money to the Masses where you can actually make savings. Because I know, for example, from my own personal experience this week, well, simple, if you do it through Money to the Masses, you get the first 10,000 free for the first year with no fees at all.
Yeah, see, this is the thing I forgot to mention that. We do go and negotiate deals with these different people. It doesn't change what I think of them. Like, I've been quite open about Fidelity. They sponsor this podcast, for example, and I'm quite open and sometimes harsh on them. And it's one of the things that they understand is that our independence is integral to what we do. We'll never be compromised. But what we do sometimes do is, despite that, we will sit there and say to them, we want an offer. Get a good offer, and it will make your proposition hopefully more attractive. But at the same time, it makes no difference about what we say about you. And people have said that. I mean, I think in days gone by, I absolutely slate some platforms, and we still will negotiate a deal for people, because if people decide they still want to take it out, they should be able to make some form of saving, because I know how these platforms work and the money that they make and where they can take a bit less profit from their customers. So that's what we do, and that's what I love about Money to the Masses.
Good stuff. So that's it. Episode 213 done. If you want to get in touch with Damien, you can do so. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Head over to Instagram if you want to stay in touch with all the latest developments. We're having a hell of a lot of fun over on Instagram at the moment. You might even see some comical stuff with us playing around in the office. It's all good fun.
Well, you will do, because we've been doing that a lot this week. So until next week, Andy.
Until next week.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.